I am Philip Spencer. I'm from Kingston University in the UK, and I am going to chair this session on the memory of genocide with respect to the prevention of gross human rights violations, a comparative view. And we've got 4 speakers on the panel today. Marcello Flores from the University of Siena, Feierstein from Universidad Nacional de Febrero in Argentina, Mirsad Tokaca from Sarajevo, Research and Documentation Centar, Sarajevo, Andrea Bartoli, who is from ICAR here at George Mason and is indeed the host of this event. We've got an hour and a half for this, and I'm going to take them in the order of Marcello Flores first, then Feierstein second, Mirsad Tokaca third, and then Andrea Bartoli, who has some, I think, general reflections conclude. And there should be time for discussion. I think people will be speaking for about 15-20 minutes each. So without further ado, I'll ask Professor Flores to start.
Thank you. The roots and causes of genocide are manifold. There are no single explanations to the decision of getting rid of groups perceived as enemies. For better understanding and preventing mass killing and genocide, we need to focus on several aspects of the strategy of violence shaped in the past. Memory has always been blended in the mass violence, even if at a different rate and level. In the building of stereotypes that easily leads to the demonization and dehumanization of groups and community perceived as enemies, the role of memory of past events and conflicts is always present, as it is in the arising of anger, shame, fear, resentment, whose emotional outcomes are often linked with hatred and violence. The way groups are defined by their neighbors and shape their own identity is always rooted in the collective memory. The history of the past is always mythologized, both for themselves and the minorities. The building of an identity happens over time, and it is constantly renewed. Continuity and innovation are part of it on an equal footing, although the role varies according to the various times and circumstances. It is a political and a cultural process alike, which predominantly moves from top to bottom, from the summits of power to our society. Nevertheless, the primary responsibility for the building of an identity lies in the political establishment as a whole. We should never forget that after every historical watershed, identity tends to recreate itself, and in so doing it retains obvious elements of continuity, but at the same time tries to break the recent past in the name of emerging and shared values, new symbols, new forms of coexistence. Historical mythologies of nation and ethnicity, the tangle of long-held memories and sudden crises, help to create a cultural and public climate ready for violence against the supposed enemies. How it is possible to share a common history, common values, and a common public culture if some groups are excluded not only by benefits of economic resources, of political opportunities, of educational possibilities, but also by their memories and identities? If the collective memory of a nation, a community, a party, an ethnic or religious group is a reconstruction of the past toward the vision of the present world, how history became legitimized and the past shared in a way that can help peace and solidarity to grow instead of fear, discrimination and hatred? This is a very important question for the historians, especially those who identify themselves with the nation's community or party. This does not necessarily mean adjusting historical truth to the needs of ideology, but it certainly implies a strong impulse to determine certainties and interpretations that are both consistent with and useful to the shared identity. Who has the power to establish the truth? General Patton's decision to force the German inhabitants of Dachau to enter the just liberated camp and see with their own eyes the piles of corpses and the emaciated survivors was not a choice dictated only by a moral impulse or by political expediency. It was an antidote, however limited from a quantitative point of view, against any future denial. Truth was thus associated with a strong emotional tension, becoming in itself the builder of a new memory that would intertwine with the pre-existing one, in which the existence of the concentration camp was absent or repressed. It was not so in Japan, both for the stronger disparity of the judgment of the Tokyo trials and for the presence of the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, greatly deeper than that of the violence committed during the war. There are truths imposed by the power that retain the status of official truths, although they are not shared by the subjects upon whom they are imposed. There are truths that, after being considered as such for a short or long time, are suddenly turned into lies by direct experience or by the release or discovery of documents. There are also official truths that acquire a character of certainty, of founding myths, of collective conviction, of widespread prejudice. Mass killing and genocide have often a logical and a rational behind, sometimes rooted in the mythologized history, sometimes to become a new constructed memory. The historians of the Belgrade Academy of Science, for example, who have endorsed and facilitated the creation of a Serbian identity founded on ethnic nationalism and the denials of other rights and identities, helped strongly to create the myth of an imminent genocide of Serbians in Kosovo, favoring the idea of the Great Serbia and the politics of ethnic cleansing which followed. The same holds for the Turkish historians who justified the Armenians' deportation during the First World War in the name of the national security, and who attribute to the hardship of the war period the number of Armenian victims, which at any rate they maintain was lower than that of Turkish victims of the conflict on the Caucasus. What we need to stress in a way is that Ottoman leaders thought either real the Armenian menace or that they could make it real for the Turkish people. And the same happened more recently in Bosnia and Rwanda. A close examination of historical truth is necessary but not sufficient to avoid the revival of feelings of discrimination and hatred that can push again to violence. The knowledge and awareness of the past must help to reinforce the sharing of citizenship by members of different ethnic and religious groups, but often it turns on the contrary. How to strengthen the respect for historical truth and to weaken the historical mythology that often affects not only the perpetrators but also the victims. To attribute, for example, the Armenian genocide to the hatred of the Turks and make it just the final point of a long genocidal strategy started in the late 19th century is a different, even if more understandable, kind of historical mythology. And it is the denial of the violence committed against the Serbs or against Hutu once their genocidal policy had been stopped. The construction of memory after the genocide is something different from the building of historical stereotypes and mythology before it occurs. In this part we did especially in the first case because it is easier to stress the role of the collective memory and of the historical narrative in helping a climate of tolerance and reconciliation or in preventing its fulfillment. The experience of Germany, Cambodia, Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia and Rwanda are very different but also very enlightening, and it is the experience of the TRC in South Africa or that of the other truth commissions in Africa and Latin America. How can tolerance be promoted in the field of memory and history? How to track myths and stereotypes, lies and beliefs widely accepted in the different groups and often borrowed by identity's necessity more than by truth's respect? A necessary task for the historians seems to be fighting what we can call the Clio's crimes. Historians justifying unacceptable political or ethical behavior, truth being concealed or manipulated by those in power or by collective identities afraid to come to terms with reality, the allegiance to projects, ideology or cultures that need historical legitimization to interpret the past to their own benefit, the identification with the partisan memory and its promotion to the rank of historical truth. One of their main duties is to counter the social or manipulative use of history, its conversion into a tool to legitimize what it is illegitimate, and to propose a critical approach to the reconstruction of the past. One could even say that historians should be traitors or displaced person. They cannot belong to any identity, since identity is inevitably founded upon expedient truths which should instead be exposed and called into question by critical scrutiny. Moreover, they cannot have any loyalty but the search for truths, in the plural. Of course, this is all the more imperative when official histories are more deeply rooted and widespread, in which case the historian should counter them by a critical approach, making sure that respect for history comes before loyalty to the fatherland, community, party, or church. Within the remedies against the persistence of hatred and intolerance, there are the role of government and institutions to help the civil society's organization to better organize themselves, a growing pressure to realize justice both in the traditional form of the retributive justice and in the innovative way of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, an urging on shared values to shape the collective morality. Are these remedies enough to build up a common and shared historical truth about the conflicts and hatred of the past? It is difficult to believe. Here again comes back the problem of justice. Who is to be punished and how? Just without the perpetrator or as many as possible to single out, by national or international tribunals. When the perpetrators, as always happens in genocides, are thousands and thousands, trying to punish them all can help to restore the sense and feeling of justice of the community of the victims, or will help to perpetuate divisions, revenge, and fears. National reconciliation first, even above justice, was the choice of Charles de Gaulle in post-war France, and that of most of the former communist states after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But was it to be done about reconciliation not when it is needed inside one country, but between two countries? Genocide generally occurs against a part, a group of the same territorial entity. This is not the case for the memory, which often puts a country against another. How to overcome the denial of the Turkish state of the Armenian genocide and the request by many Armenians of the symbolic recognition of the word genocide as the only significant step in the acknowledgement of the historical truth? Identity is to have in common not only memory but also forgetting. To forget was the solution in Europe after World War II to reconstruct societies and to build up national solidarity, but perhaps not to enforce, at least in Italy, the sharing of democratic values and the full respect of the rule of law. To forget was the solution set in Athens in the ancient time. The Greek poet Hesiod wrote that Lethe, or oblivion, was the child of Eris, or discord, and Plutarch thus describes the origins of the temple dedicated to Lethe built in the heart of Athens Acropolis. In the conflict between Athena and Poseidon over the city of Athens, the latter was defeated. In spite of that, he wanted to erect a temple to Lethe, and in so doing became a model for politicians. Forgetting after victory is easy, after defeat is far more difficult and useful. Historians should be the guardians of universality rather than identity. Even though many of them happens to be, by choice or by hazard, the historians of the winners or of the defeated. On this point, Reinhard Koselleck remarked that the winners' historians interpret their success as a long-term teleological process in retrospect, whereas the historians of the defeated are led to seek medium and long-term causes and often produce more enduring and clear consideration. If history seems to be made by winners in the short term, over the long term, the vanquished offer more material for historical understanding. Turning to memory is never a motive to start a strategy of discrimination and violence, but the recourse to memory once a conflict has begun is the main road to radicalize the conflict. And the same often happens when the conflict is finished, when the justice is necessarily unaccomplished, when the reconstruction brings inequality. To build civil society association and community-based institutions, to bring together elites and youth from conflicting factions, both in an official and sometimes official way, can help to stimulate tolerance. But to have a common recognized history, at least in few factual aspects, which allow different memories to live together, may be the point of no return for avoiding a new starting of discrimination and violence. This is not an easy task, but it is certainly an exciting challenge, especially for the historians, to help the factual truths to be accepted and shared, and to avoid to attribute to entire groups as a genetic or cultural mark the criminal behaviors of the few active, responsible, and perpetrators. Explaining the complexity of the historical context may be a way to avoid the moral or psychological essentializing of the others, which is always at the roots of hatred and discrimination.
Thank you very much, Marcello. Extremely interesting talk. I'm going to take all the questions at the end, if that's okay. It seems to make more sense, particularly because I think Andrea Bartoli will have some reflections that probably directly or indirectly relate to each of the previous three speakers. So I'll turn next to Daniel Feierstein, his contribution.
Okay, thank you. Well, today in the first session I'd like to talk about the uses of definition and their consequences, particularly in the case of Argentina and Latin American experiences. And then today in the third session I'd like to talk more about general consequences of this question in the analysis of human rights violation. Well, terror was used systematically in different Latin American countries in the second half of the 20th century in order to transform whole societies. State and paramilitary forces were established to intimidate, kidnap, torture, and murder political opponents. The widespread practice of disappearing the victims served to eliminate evidence as well as instill terror in the communities to which the victims belonged, and deny relatives and friends the chance to grieve for their loved ones. Although similar methods were used throughout the region, the scale and the systematic character of the repression varied from one country to another. In some cases, violence was ferocious, but annihilation was sporadic and limited to small people, as in Brazil, Ecuador, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Honduras, where the number of murders is estimated at hundreds. By contrast, thousands or tens of thousands of people from all walks of life were murdered in Chile, Argentina, Haiti, and Bolivia. Here, the sheer extent of the repression shows a deliberate policy of social transformation involving the systematic destruction of trade unions, political parties, student groups, and so on. In short, the aim wasn't the political persecution of specific individuals, but the devastation of social groups as such. Guatemala has become the archetype of this modus operandi because of the scale and duration of the repression and its impact on the population, with whole communities being wiped out. However, it was Argentina that had the dubious distinction of organizing repression and political intervention throughout the rest of Latin America. The Argentinian army trained Latin America's military, particularly in Honduras and El Salvador, in counterinsurgency tactics, torture, and the art of disappearing people. Many analysts and international observers, as well as the perpetrators themselves, have used the term war, counterinsurgency war, civil war, anti-subversive war, dirty war, to describe the terror implemented by some of Latin America's dictators. However, the concept of war is inappropriate to define the general pattern of processes in Latin America, because it suggests that the victims were mostly armed combatants rather than the unarmed civilian that the vast majority really was. It also tends to gloss over the true nature and purpose of the atrocities committed against them. Although modern war has blurred the distinction between combatants and non-combatants, producing ever-growing numbers of civilian victims, the majority of the conflicts of Latin America lack the basic condition necessary to speak of war. Minimally, this consists of a confrontation between professional armies, control of territory, and in the case of civil war, the alignment of most of the population with the different parties in conflict. If we accept these three prerequisites for war, only Colombia, Peru, Nicaragua, and El Salvador were ever actually at war. The concept of war, then, has proved more useful for legitimizing the actions of the perpetrator than for constructing an understanding of the specific nature of these conflicts. Attempts to describe such conflicts conflicts, only in terms of repression or crimes against humanity, are also problematic, because they tend to look at individual cases in isolation, treating them as excesses committed by Latin American dictators, rather than as a set of common policies based on a shared ideology of national identity and security, and aimed at transforming and purifying the societies of Latin America in their own words. The term genocide has been widely used to describe extermination of indigenous communities in Guatemala. It has generally been avoided when referring to similar developments in other Latin American countries, because the destruction of political groups was excluded from the definition of genocide adopted in the Convention of Genocide. The exclusion of political groups focuses attention narrowly on ethnicity rather than on the wider political objectives of genocide. This restricted focus was imposed not only with regard to the strategy of annihilation pursued by the Third Reich, but also in the analysis of subsequent conflicts in Indonesia, Cambodia, the Balkans, and Africa. The military repression in Argentina is a good testing ground for the notion that in modern times, except in wartime and during colonial occupation, genocide has been perpetrated from within. Firstly, there are some legal sentences stating unequivocally that what happened in Argentina was genocide. Secondly, unlike what happened in Guatemala, ethnicity and religion played an almost negligible role in the choice of victims, with the exception of the non-systematic anti-Semitism of the perpetrators in Argentina. This fact that has forced many genocide scholars to go beyond the question of which specific groups were annihilated and reconsider the strategic purpose of genocide in Argentina as a whole, as a practice directed against the whole Argentinian group. In many ways, the process in Argentina was remarkably similar to that in Cambodia, although the ideological goals pursued were diametrically opposed. Let us look first at the legal position of the Argentine genocide. In 1999, following extensive inquiries, Judge Baltasar Garzón of the 5th Central Court of Instruction in Madrid indicted 98 members of the Argentinian military for claims of genocide and terrorism. Although Spain's Audiencia Nacional later altered the charge to crimes against humanity, the Federal Criminal Oral Court No. 1 of La Plata, Argentina, has since sentenced Miguel Echecolás, former Director General of Investigation for the Buenos Aires Police, and Christian von Barney, a police chaplain, for crimes against humanity within the framework of the genocide that happened in Argentina between 1976 and 1984. In both cases, Echecolás and von Barney, the court produces a justification of why the genocide label should be applied to the Argentinian experience. I will synthesize the grounds, but there are four main questions. The first is political groups were included in all drafts of the Convention on Genocide following United Nations Resolution 96-1 of the General Assembly of December 11, 1946, and then were excluded not for legal reasons from the Convention, but because of the prevailing political circumstances at the time, a reason not supported by the philosophy of law. Second argument, the second reason, even though the Convention excluded political groups, the court considered that there is no impediment to the use of the term genocide in describing what happened in Argentina, namely the partial annihilation of a national group, since Argentina's Supreme Court ruled in 1984 that we consider as proven the practices of mass destruction implemented by those calling themselves the process of national reorganization, a process that was practically identical throughout the country and prolonged in time. Third argument, the court further considered that those targeted for extermination weren't specific individuals, rather thousands were disappeared or killed for no political or ideological reason other than the fact that they belong to certain communities, sectors, or groups of the Argentinian national group, which the perpetrators considered in their inconceivable criminal logic to be incompatible. And fourth argument, the court considered that the term national group is absolutely valid for analyzing what happened in Argentina, since the perpetrators set out to destroy part of the social fabric in order to produce a sufficiently substantial change so as to affect the state in its entirety. Given the inclusion of the term total or partial in the definition of the 1948 Convention, it is evident that the Argentinian national group has been annihilated partially and to a sufficiently substantial extent as to alter the social relation within the nation. The annihilation in Argentina wasn't spontaneous, wasn't fortuitous, wasn't irrational. It was the systematic destruction of a substantial part of the Argentine national group with the intention of transforming it as such, redefining its way of life, its social relations, its destiny, its future. End of the quote of the court. Yeah? The court concludes the sentence saying that from all that has gone before, it is indisputable that we are not dealing, as we previously expected, with a mere succession of crimes, but rather with something significantly greater and deserves the name of genocide. However, labeling the Argentine experience as genocide has been controversial, particularly outside Argentina. One of the main arguments of the lawyer and international organization that rejected Garzón's indictment and the Argentine court sentences has been that the victims were individually chosen for the political beliefs and not because they belonged to a group, which would imply that those responsible for the disappearance and or murder didn't have the necessary criminal intent, as they didn't intend to destroy a group but only to eliminate political dissidents. Currently, national and international lawyers, human rights organizations, and researchers continue to argue over these two ways of understanding the facts, genocide or crimes against humanity. The question remains controversial. Researchers and lawyers that support the idea that genocide was committed in Argentina say that there is ample evidence that the vast majority of the victims were social activists belonging to trade unions, student organizations, or neighborhood associations. The notion of individual political dissidents has thus proved difficult to sustain because there was a group dimension. Also, there are more than 500 cases in which the children of activists were kidnapped and in some cases tortured, murdered, or disappeared. Children that by no stretch of the imagination could be classed as political dissidents. Indeed, the defenders of the genocide position says that focusing too narrowly on the fact that the victims belong to certain groups distracts attention away from the real intentions of the perpetrators, the transformation of the rest of Argentinian society by eliminating these groups and what they represent. For a better understanding of the debate, we turn now to public declarations made by some of the perpetrators themselves, and which are widely quoted in the academic literature, and particularly as well as constituting a proof of genocide in the Argentine court sentences. For example, General Jorge Rafael Videla, who headed the military government, said in December 1976 that Argentina is a Western and Christian country, not because the notice at the Seiza airport says so, but because of its history. It was born Christian under Spanish rule. It inherited its Western culture from Spain, and it has never renounced this condition. On the contrary, it has defended it. It is to defend this Western and Christian condition as a way of life that this struggle has begun against those who haven't accepted this way of life and have tried to impose a different way. Many similar declarations by the oppressor are on record, but perhaps the clearest indication of the military dictatorship's intention to systematically reorganize Argentinian society is to be found in the name of the regime gave itself. Proceso de Reorganización Nacional, this process of national reorganization. The process was worked out in detail by General Díaz-Besone, the Minister of Planning, in his national project, which argued that the real objective is to organize a new and viable political system and to make the achievements of our armed intervention irreversible. Founding a new republic is no easy matter. The armed forces must be sufficiently alert, determined, and resourceful to act simultaneously as an efficient fighting force against guerrillas and terrorists, an efficient surgeon that will remove the evil from all social classes and walks of life. Although state repression in Argentina is better documented than in Chile, Bolivia, Guatemala, the logic applied by the perpetrators in these countries was similar. On the other hand, the annihilation of indigenous communities in Guatemala, which researchers agree was a clear instance of genocide, had less to do with ethnicity or religion per se, than with the perpetrators' perception of these communities as natural allies of the guerrillas. Thus, the Guatemalan genocide was motivated primarily by a decision to politically transform Guatemalan society rather than by racism. The same is true of the many so-called ethnic killings in Bolivia and El Salvador, where racism among the rank and file was manipulated instrumentally for strategic political ends. One of the risks of excluding political groups from our genocide concept is that in doing so, we may distort the strategic purpose of the annihilation processes, which were directed not against ethnic groups as such, but against different groups, many of them ethnic groups, for political reasons. An over-exclusive approach also blurs the distinction between places like Argentina and Guatemala, where the transformation or purification of society was brought about by the systematic annihilation of whole groups, and other places like Brazil or Ecuador, where the state pursued the same goal by different means. In short, it is worth emphasizing that the notion of genocide as the partial destruction of a national group by members of the same group highlights the strategic nature of acts committed by agents of the state in some Latin American countries. This view of genocide may in turn provide us with a broader and deeper understanding of other instances of mass destruction in the 20th century. These cases are often misunderstood because of a refusal by scholars to examine the deeper political nature of almost all the modern genocide. The history of Latin America in the second half of the 20th century illustrates with unusual forcefulness what lies at the heart of modern genocide processes. It demonstrates clearly how, in some cases, the systematic annihilation of certain groups served as a tool for the partial destruction and transformation of society from within. The fact that in Latin America these groups were clearly chosen for political rather than ethnic or religious reasons facilitates the understanding of similar processes where the ethnic or religious elements are more intertwined. Although the use of the term genocide to describe some of these cases remains controversial, a deeper analysis of events in Latin America could produce a better understanding of mass annihilation processes occurring in the rest of the world. The notion of a guilty war has in general helped to legitimize the systematic violation of human rights in Latin America, and neither reflects the nature of the conflict nor the characteristics of victims. On the other hand, if the collective memory of genocide is one of clearly differentiated groups annihilating one another, the strategic aims of genocide will be fulfilled. These alienated ways of constructing memory will gradually force those who survive to align themselves on one side or another, until the survivors can no longer see how the processes of annihilation have transformed their societies and the ways they construct their own identities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That's extremely interesting talk too, from a different angle. Okay, now turn to Mirsad Tokaca, for his presentation. My apologies.
Is now better? Okay. After 17 years of researches of Bosnian case, the Bosnian war, I always raise one question. What will happen with such huge amount of documents, analysis, testimonies, court decision? 2 years ago we published a report about human casualty, human loss and infected in Bosnia. We created a database of every single name of people who were killed or missing in the Bosnian war. There were around 100,000 names in that database. Is that enough? Is that after that possible some kind of revisionism, denial, crime, genocide, war, genocide, I think that it is not enough to finish research, to write good books, to give excellent lectures. But for me, key question was how we can empower people, how we can empower victims, how we can empower societies to understand what does it mean war. How you can identify yourself in Sarajevo. Where is Sarajevo? Where is Sarajevo on geopolitical map? Where is Bosnia? Thousands and thousands, millions and millions of people. Where is that Bosnia? Who they are? And for myself also. How is the history will shape my individual remembering and memory of my children, and memory of my grandsons, and generation which comes. And I would like to show you something what we invented recently as a part of our effort to ensure people to have full access to documents, facts, and information. It's Bosnian War Crime Atlas. Something, in fact, that should be a new source of information for people. It's in fact part of our effort to prevent something the professor said, and what is Balkan, but not only Balkan originality and specificity, manipulation and mythical tales. We have permanent, on a daily basis, repeating different mythical tales without strong and empirical-based research. And then we wanted to preserve memory and to honor memory. We have to express respect to every single individual who suffered due to it. And of course, as I said, accessibility of information is essential. We want to ensure, no matter where are you, here in Washington, Sydney, Australia, or in Sarajevo, to have full access to information. And also we want to support some institutions, ICTY, National Judiciary, expert and scientific institutions. Of course, researchers are one of the main stakeholders, students also, but victims and their families are the main target. We want to help them to create their family history, individual history, through our Bosnian War Crime Atlas and also some other efforts. Together with the Bosnian Book of Death, which will be published at the end of this year, Bosnian War Crime Atlas will become one of the main RDC projects in the next several years. Why this project is essentially innovative? Until today, there is no institution in Bosnia or in the region, I don't know, in other countries, which use this kind of approach to create digital memorial to victims. And you will see a little later how we imagine this very practically. And also, how we can ensure access, keyword access to information. Because of all these monopolies of this information. After the Second World War, our memory was fashioned, was shaped by an ideological approach. Winners created our memory. We have totally corrected memory linking to the Second World War. And 60 years later, some foibers military border appeared in which partisans killed fascists, in fact, prisoners of war. Then later appeared in a Slovenian-Austrian border. It means that we need full truth about historical events. Not only my history and my perception of history, but also perception of others. It is something what is main pillar of RDC activities. Of course, I don't want to burden you with technical details, but only to show you very, very practical. In fact, what you will have at the end of this year on disposition. Here on the left side, this will be multilingual project. English, Spanish, French. In this moment, this is Bosnian version, but I will explain. If you want to trace group or mass killing you can use different locations, and only with small click on this, you will go straight to location where something happened. This is one location, and then you will see monuments, all documents in connection with this massacre, and names of victims. Names of victims. Every single name of this event. But also, if you want to see what's happening in Febrero, Febrero is a town in the western part of Austria. You can go immediately there and see map of mass graves. All around Febrero, hundreds and hundreds of mass graves. Every single of these locations was visited by our staff. And we have a single, absolute detail who is there, who was killed, when, how, under what conditions. Simply, some people were killed here with most of straw, then not great information about things. I know that today I saw in this schedule some reports about Sarajevo, about Genocide in Sarajevo. Who knows what it is? It's a national library in Sarajevo. This is a map of Sarajevo. Visit. This is the ancient videotape. You will have access to video documents, photo documents, court decision, everything that is in connection with specific events. And simply, you can trace whatever you want. One of mass killing in Sarajevo. And attack on hospitals and other facilities. All protected facilities were traced. This is state hospital in Sarajevo. This is very slow. Then, in business centers, we are attacked also in Sarajevo. This is business centers. There is no sound, but this is directly recorded when it's happening. And many other events will be traced, explained, and simply you can conclude after that what's happened. All monuments which were built after that are here also. Physically, technically, you shouldn't come to Sarajevo to see all these things. You can sit here and trace this Bosnian War crime atlas and simply see what's happening. Interesting. This is one of Sarajevo. And also here is ICAR, sentenced to Gauge case, Gerald Gauge, sentenced for 45 years for killing people in Sarajevo in similar occasions. Why these approaches in both? Why we need Bosnian law primaries? Simply to prevent Bosnian society, not only Bosnian society, from historical, political, ideological manipulation and creation of new. It's something that we want to achieve this tool. This is in fact our tools to fight against forgetting and against manipulation. We want to have facts and you can interpret. You will be free to think about these things and to conclude whatever you want. We want to offer you hard, painful facts. It is the idea of this Muslim state college.
I'll turn to Andrea Bartoli for the final talk in this session, sort of his reflections.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and to speak after these very interesting presentations. I think that I'm very intrigued by all three presentations, and I'll try to respond to them as much as I can. I think that Marcello's provocation in a way about the universal historian, it's an interesting one. I think that is reminding us of the power of oblivion is also a very important provocation. I do want to address Daniel's reference about the internal genocidal distinctions, because I think it's a very important contribution, and his last invitation to consider memory as a fundamental contribution to prevention. I would like, before that, ask how many of us are vaccinated against polio? If you can raise your hand. Very good. It's an interesting question that has nothing to do with nothing. Unless you consider that my brother was not. He was born just before. And if you are vaccinated, most probably it's because the state, that is to say a political formation, took upon itself to do something for a collectivity. So my question to Marcello is, does the state have anything to do with the way we remember things? And if I look at Italy's squares, I see many monuments to our own Risorgimento. A national project built on violence that forced Italians to be one. I wonder if the world that we are building shouldn't ask states to remember differently, in a truly inclusive and universal manner. I wonder if what you are doing in Sarajevo shouldn't actually be part of this conversation of the new prevention system that is not preventing only against polio, but against this scourge we call genocide. Let me elaborate on that for a moment. I would like to tell a story for a moment, again, forcing you beyond your comfort zone. I'm Catholic, proud of being so. But then I heard of the story of Dirk, and I cannot but think about it. Dirk was a very honest man, very well regarded in his community. But he was odd, because he believed in 1600 Netherlands that children should not be baptized, and that the Spirit speaks to anyone, and that the church should not have clergy. He was an Anabaptist Christian, part of a small minority of Christians that the majority of Catholics and Lutherans felt very strongly were threatening the political order. Dirk was accused of being an heretic. The justice system legally bound him to a prison from which he escaped. The guards were running after him. And when he was fleeing, it was winter in the Netherlands that night, he was using the canals. As you know, you can skate on the canals when the ice is strong. And he knew his land very well. So he left fleeing for his life, and then for a moment he turned back. And he looked at something that he didn't want to look at. Something he didn't decide to look. And yet after looking, he just went back. He went away from his freedom, back to where he was coming from. What Dirk saw was that one of the guards, too heavy, carrying his weapons, had crashed the ice and was actually drowning. So Dirk didn't think twice, came back, took the man out of the ice, saving the man's life. He was an heretic again. The other guards came, he was convicted and executed by the legal authority of the state. Why do I know the story? Because somebody remembered it. Mennonites, after Mennonites, generation after generation kept the memory of this particular act in something called the Martyr's Mirror. A big book that brings about life of the past for the learning of the present. Marcello could concern itself with the possibility that somebody is keeping this particular memory to instill in kids the hate of the Catholics, so that they could, in a way, go back against the Catholic that did such an evil thing to this wonderful Mennonite. But the reason is actually exactly the reverse. Mennonites are telling the stories of Dirk to Mennonites' children, so that children could learn how to emulate Dirk. This brings me to what I think our lady speakers gave us so eloquently. That is something that happened in the last few years. That is the fundamental shift in human consciousness of the victim's imperative. We cannot read history as a power game anymore. Or at least we cannot learn history only as a power game. Because that guard that was saved actually lost when Dirk was killed. And Dirk is winning. Every time, as a Catholic, I'm free today to tell the story of a Mennonite that gave his life to save the Catholic guards, recognizing that his humanity was in many ways better, stronger, freer. The victim's imperative tells us that indeed we have a responsibility of memory, that we should not be afraid of the responsibility of memory, that we should take the responsibility of memory seriously and work out the human system, including the state, in such a way that indeed the chances and possibilities of new recurrence of injustice will diminish. Are we going to be certain that this is going to happen? Certainly not. But at least on our part, I would insist that the responsibility of memory is upon us. And the reason for that in the prevention frame is fundamental, because we can prevent only what we know. This is just an epistemological paradox. If you do not know something, you cannot prevent. So I think that, in a way, back to Marcello's point, we are fundamentally here to recognize that prevention is strictly linked with knowledge, and to a particular kind of knowledge, that is politically relevant knowledge. Now, anything can be political. If you had a little larger farm and a few cows, you were a kulaka. You were not politically relevant before the Bolshevik Revolution. Then somebody decided that Kulago was actually a very important term. And you could be genocided because you were one. It's very interesting how we are making politically relevant distinctions. Being gay, or being Italian, or being whatever next time. If a moral panic comes, all the Bartolis may be dead, simply because Bartoli, for some reason, becomes a politically relevant thing. Okay? But for us, I think that knowing human violence from the side of the victims forces us to face the moral dilemma of commitment to justice or neglect. I think that what is happening, the idea of remembering victims by name, is just extraordinary. Millions before that were killed and just led to oblivion. Not to the oblivion of their sons and daughters, not to the oblivion of their spouses, not to the oblivion of their parents, not to the oblivion of those who knew them, but to the oblivion of us, deprived of so many, because there was no way to remember. I wonder if a new Red Cross shouldn't be at stake. A collective enterprise in which we are not just saving bodies and saving corpses and saving people wounded, but saving the memories of the victims in such a way that they will be recognized by the universal that is us. The choice in front of genocide is simple. We want to prevent or to promote. And I think that we need to face, when we remember memory, when we speak about memories, that we are not speaking only about victims and perpetrators. We're also speaking about rescuers. People that risk their life to save someone else. To take the one that were in the grip of power and violence and rescue them. I think that they should be celebrated as models. But in many states, actually, to rescue is almost a shame. To rescue the wrong person, to rescue at the wrong time, to rescue the wrong kind. There are societies now in which rescuing Jews during the Holocaust is actually not a good thing. That tells you something about those societies and about the states in which those memories are preserved. I think that rescuers should become the very foundation of the prevention system. And memory gives us the responsibility to distinguish what violence binds. When violence occurs, everything collapses. Perpetrators think themselves as righteous. The violent ones are cleaning, and the powerful ones are doing justice. Those who killed Deer did so with a sense of justice and self that was sanctioned by their own institutions. But I think that victims, perpetrators, rescuers, and all of us do not live, remember, and understand human violence the same way. And these fundamentally different narratives should be preserved as such. Should not be just combined in a melting pot of memory that doesn't help anyone. Because the universal is one, made of all, but must be made whole. The telling of this story comes alive today because you hear it through the voice of a Catholic, understanding its Catholicity differently because of Dirk. Dirk is giving myself to myself in a way that I could not expect. And my telling Dirk's story to you is giving Dirk to himself in a way that he could not anticipate. 500 years later, the wonder of memory. I do believe that there is a link between memory and liberation from injustice. Injustice as a grip that keeps taking us and choke the capacity of our own understanding of life way after the events are happening. Victims are not only made by the violent ones, but by the neglect of those who do not pay attention, do not recognize, and do not respond. I think that while the blood of Abel must be remembered, prosecuting Cain is not enough. That is to say, we cannot accept that memory is only a matter of the formal justice system. And in that I'm completely in agreement with Marcello. But I feel that there is a sort of constraining when we say that the only memory is the memory of the justice system. I think that there is something powerful about the voice of the victims to be heard. I think that there is something powerful about the human urge to listen to those voices and try to learn from them. But at the same time, perpetrators too must be reauthored, reinterpreted. Remember, as such, learning must come from their doing. Rescuers too must be recognized and remembered, because they are the expression of the unconstrained human freedom to do good. The ones that were able, in the midst of violence, to rescue somebody are telling all of us that this is not the only way. That actually it's possible to do differently, and it's actually possible to prevent. Thank you very much.
Gosh, well, okay, hands flying up all over the place. Every time I listen to Andrea, I kind of come away with a critical story that I then use with my own students, and I've had about 3 today, so thank you very much. Okay, we've got some other questions, and people are flinging up their hands as we go. We've got a roving mic as well, which is great. Okay, we'll start over there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Herb Hirsch. I'm a political scientist and editor of Genocide Studies and Prevention. Not to be too indelicate or self-promoting about it, but what Marcello and Andrea talked about brings up a pet peeve of mine about so-called genocide studies, and that is reinventing the wheel. I wrote almost every single thing that they said in a book in 1995 called Genocide and the Politics of Memory, and I don't see anything new or anything that changes what I said at that point. And in fact, I covered all of this. And in fact, this so-called genocide studies becomes an exercise in, as I said, reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. There's extensive literature in that. There's extensive literature in the study of heroes in cultural anthropology, what Andrea was talking about. There's extensive literature on the psychology of socialization and resocialization in terms of memory. I mean, we can't just do this stuff without doing the requisite research. So I guess my question is, what's new?
Take some other questions. Over here.
Can you hear me? I won't need this. I'm in the theater department at UW-Madison. I was anyway. So let me ask the question.
My observation about the panel was one that seemed to me perhaps as important. The first 2 papers I would categorize as something theoretical. The third paper was something pragmatic, and the 4th paper was something artistic. It seems to me these are 3 very different ways of approaching and looking at the subject of genocide. So my question really is, from the 4 panelists, if there's something here that you would like to assess and think about, and how your work can be extended and opened up by looking at the other sides and other facets of these investigations.
Thank you. Faye Grayjower, independent artist in Boston, Massachusetts. I was very interested in, I will not be able to pronounce your name correctly, in the Documentation Center. And of course, it's the time where one can do things digitally, so it's fabulous that you're doing this. I'm assuming that this is constantly being added on to, is it a kind of Wikipedia of sorts that people can constantly, sort of a multi-question for an embellishment of your presentation, is it something that's constantly added? Can people add comment statements? Do they generate conversation among themselves? And one part you didn't mention, and I don't know if it's just embedded and it wasn't a part of your, when I was in Sarajevo in 2007 at this conference, and there were several apartments that were pointed out as apartments that were used for rape. Is that the kind of information that would be in the Google Earth map, and people could address it, and a whole world can come out of that? And also, is this a tool that is or could ultimately be used as a truth and reconciliation format?
Just take one more question, then I'll try and put something. Mirsad?
First of all, for Professor Feierstein, the Venezuelan representative in the ad hoc committee when drafting the Genocide Convention actually said that Latin America has only interest in the political war, because racial or religious hatred is just irrelevant to the Latin American reality. I think in many ways that encompasses something extremely interesting about the Latin American perspective on genocide. We have a Latin American conception of genocide, unlike a European, not to say a Judeo-Christian, although there is no such thing as a Judeo-Christian conception of genocide. Another question to Professor Tokaca. I think it is so impressive, but I want to ask in a certain critical way. This whole the technology of commemoration, which obviously in Israel we deal with it a lot. There is a problem with simulation, with overdoing it in a way, with the memory, the production of memory, and it connects with what Professor Bartoli tried to think about what memory does and what simulation and to have a Google Earth of the apartments in which rape took place, to have the beds within the apartment in which you don't want to simulate genocide. I don't want to be in a world in which I can relive each and every genocide through technology. I want to have memory doing something else. So, do you think about those kind of things? Do you have a certain dialogue regarding those things? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to get some responses first, and then we'll have another round of questions. So the first question, which was about there's nothing new here. Anybody want to respond to that?
Just a quick response. Always happens that if we deal with great problems, often seems that there is anything new about. I think that at least in the last 10 years, the work of historians dealing with genocide experiences has put in questions most of the certainty of the genocide scholars coming from social science and political science and law scholarship. And this is not an answer, but I think that most of the work of historians is to make the right question. Then the answer is something that can arrive just from the whole community. And in this case, I think that if we still now don't agree or have some difficulties to deal with definition, with responsibility, with how much memory and how much oblivion, who is the maker, the builder of history, state, society, and so on. That means that the problem is still new in a way.
I think that on one hand we are building on your work, so I don't think that there is anything wrong on recognizing, we build on these shoulder of giants. But I think that there is something different, and I think you would agree that the debate has changed from '95. I think that there is a sense, the politics of memory is very different. I think that if you look at what they are doing in Bosnia, it's phenomenal. This was not there 10 years ago. It was not there 15 years ago. It was not there 20 years ago. The Irish were able to have all the names of the ones that died. But they were 3,000 and they were spread out quite nicely, and Ireland is a fairly literate society, and you could have a name and you could have the place and how it happened and all that. What about Iraq? What about Darfur? What about all the places where we should take this frontier of a collective memory, not just as something that is for someone else to do. So in many ways, I'm actually taking your book as an invitation and say, well, 15 years later, you have people working on memories in a way that it is compelling. And I think what I hear in Daniel's point is that the fact that Argentina can speak about Argentina, how an Argentinian can speak as Daniel does, tells us of a tremendous transformation, because in 1995, he could not have said the things that he said today. The internal self-understanding of Argentina is so different today than what it was allowed to be said in 1995 when your book was, I think it's just phenomenal. So I would say actually that we may not be new, we may not have said anything new, but a lot of new things are happening around, and I think that Marcello is right in calling a panel, and back to your point of how we speak to one another, this is an attempt. I think you're right that my response is an artistic one. I appreciate the qualification, but I think I applaud Marcello actually to say, I'm an historian, I don't want genocide again. How does memory come together with prevention? I think it's a very reasonable question based on your book and the others.
Actually, I always think of you as a more theological thinker myself than artistic. I wanted to get a couple of responses really. One was, there were a couple of questions to you about whether it could be continually added to, and about whether it was what kind of tools.
Very short. We don't want to simulate anything. We only, and very simply, want to offer new source. All this information are in our archive, physical. We'll transfer some things into memorials. Simply, we need as much as possible wider range of tools. I'm victim and I am survivor of genocide. I survived, I was in Sarajevo. I know what, I felt that in my skin. But what will happen with generation? Many things that we have to break monopoly of information. It's a problem. I and he and all of us here, it's only several people. Who we are to say we have truth in our hands. We know truth. We have no right to do that. And it was a big problem for me. After millions and millions of pages of documents I get with my hands, after all these names, photo of victims, gravestones from cemeteries, all these, very meticulously collected facts, the question was, what with this? Why for me? For my promotion? No! I'm not an owner of truth. I'm only one small subject in a big story. And I want to offer, that's a responsibility. It's my part of responsibility. Responsibility of my professional ethic, responsibility of me as a person, as a father, nothing more. We should not create big things. Small things are very small, very small. This is open-ended. There is no the end of this article. This is totally open for users. Everybody can come, see, and send information. Interactive approach is very important. And we know something, but we don't know everything. There's a lot of people here in America who left Sarajevo or Bosnia or Rwanda, I don't know, places of genocide, who never said anything about what's happened to them. We want to offer to Bosnian citizens in this country, in Scandinavia, in Australia, to communicate with us through modern technology. Because they couldn't come. They come one time per year to Bosnia, probably, or never after 15 or 16 years. And they are exposed to manipulation, I can tell you. Political manipulation. Diaspora is one of the main subjects of manipulation. This is not only about genocide. this is not war. It's something what you have to understand. How to prevent conflict, how to prevent war as a terror, something that's something what we want to achieve. This one of tools,
Just before you say one,
reconciliation, sorry. Question of reconciliation is very important.
one point, I just want to make a quick plug with something else, since we were talking about technology, because there is a session about it later on in the conference. There is this extraordinary international encyclopedia, web-based encyclopedia that NATA is working on. So people, this wants to alert people to it, and there will be a session about it later on, just in terms of the tools that we've now got. Very quickly, because I know there are other questions. Now, do you want to say anything about the Venezuelan notion and what's happened in Latin America and this changing different kinds of perception of genocide in response to that?
I have 2 or 3 comments with a different question and concerning your question. Because I'm a little worried about the 2 questions, appropriation and trauma, and the uses of this question in memory. And I think that one of the problems is who is able to appropriate the narration or the different genocide memories as their own history and their own problem. That's the reason I'm saying the question of the difference of genocide between different people or genocide from within. And the second question is trauma. Is how is the working through the trauma for the victims, because it's very interesting that Freud analyzed that when you don't work through the trauma, you repeat the action with other people. And I'm really worried about some kind of victimization, and the possibility to install the situation we are always victims and we are not able to see when we are the perpetrators and not the victims. I'm really upset with the election of the keynote speaker today concerning this question. But concerning your question of the political, maybe the Latin American perspective, I think it's not only a question of Latin America. I think that in Latin America it's very clear, but I think that the processes during the Shoah, concerning the destruction of the Yugoslav identity or the Bosnian identity, I think it's in some ways the same, because when you can't see that Jewish were Germans, were Poles, were Lithuanians, were Russians, were not a question of Germans against Jewish. And it is terrible when Jewish or German can't see that the whole society were affected by genocide. I think that the main contribution from the Latin American perspective is that it's more clear in our situation because ethnicity and religion plays almost a negligible role, but it's not only from our situation. I think that in almost all the cases, and in the Shoah too, the question is that ethnicity or religion are used as a tool to destroy identities of the whole societies, and the consequences are suffered by the whole societies.
Okay, you're all going to have to miss your lunch because there's lots of contributions that people want to make. So I'm going to go on a little longer. You can all sneak out if you're starved. Okay, so I'll just take a few more. We start over here. Mic is there. Mic is there. You need the mic because of the recording.
Okay, my name is Rosita Albert. I'm from the University of Minnesota. I'm from Brazil, and I want to find out in Sarajevo, in that wonderful digital archive that you have. That's one of the things I've been talking about, communication, and what communication can contribute to the Convention on Genocide later on tomorrow. In your archive, do you also have Serbs that were in Sarajevo? Do you have people from other groups that were not Bosnian, or were Bosnian Serbs included?
know and I don't care about that kind of differences. No difference. It's only criteria. Citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, nothing more, nothing less. Religious, political, social, and other background are not important. Of course, Bosnia are victims of genocide, because genocide is according to definition, crimes against specific ethnic group. But it was the reason why I want, and we want to this approach to show who destroyed, for example, churches on some places. Who killed, for example, some specific places. That's a full truth, as I mentioned. I don't need only truth about something of my ethnic group. I need to know and to present and to show something of my country with every single dimension. It's an impartial approach, and it's not political bias or whatsoever. It was very important for me from the very beginning of my work. Just because this lady said, how we will reconcile our society? If I have this kind of division, then we have different truth. Bosnians truth, Serbs truth, Croats truth, Albanians truth, etc., etc. We need one truth, with different dimension of truth. We are not saying there is no balance, only facts and information and documents and all decision. Somebody opposed, yes, we need also truth from courtroom, but it is only one dimension. It is only one dimension. And it is, all these things are very important for the situation and long-lasting peace.
Again, Professor Tokaca, I want to congratulate you on the master's presentation, technologically, but hate has advanced with the internet. Technology is neutral, but it is abused. 1999 there was only one hate site, the Ku Klux Klan. We do an annual report. This is 10,000 plus hate sites, all in competition with each other. Now, my question is simply, is there not a danger here that you will also find alternative histories, alternative memories, as this same technology is used? And the point that you just made about not mentioning the ethnic differences, I'm wondering if it couldn't become productive. I think that the more that you show that we're universal by mentioning the particularities within that universe, you will have more credibility. But I don't doubt that there will be other technological presentations in the future that will show other truths. And I'm a little worried about how that's going to play out. Also to Daniel, I'd just like to ask whether the impact of your work has had any effect at all on the amnesty process here in Geneva.
I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. It's very dangerous. But what is the solution? We want, a lie and truth is always in permanent competition. If somebody lies, he has to offer some argument for his lies. And when you read lies and truth, if you are enough clever, you will understand what is lie, what is true. We have such strong facts, confirmed by the courts, confirmed in the courts on the ICTY in Bosnian court, that, of course, immediately 2 days after we published the Human Losses Project, in which by name every single person was recorded, we have misinterpretation and misuse of facts. It's normal. I don't want to care about that. My role and my responsibility is to offer public, open, of course, using technology. I'm not a big fan. I'm trying to say, yeah, this is our way. There's a lot of other ways how we can offer facts. But it seems to me and people around me that this could be one more very efficient way how we can reach people. It's our practice. We travel to regions, not only to Bosnia. We cover the whole region. For example, in Kosovo is now just in the middle of implementation of the Human Losses Project. We want to extend this idea, not only to stay in Bosnia, because it is not only Bosnian war, it is not internal conflict, it was regional conflict. In this conflict participated Serbia, Croatia, Kosovo, partially Macedonia, Slovenia even. And I don't know, maybe this is not a good approach. Let's see. Let's see.
She told me, but I couldn't understand exactly the question that you can repeat. maybe in Spanish. You can.
Como quieran. Si hay un impacto concreto en tu trabajo, en todo el procedimiento de amnistía que hemos pasado.
Okay. The impact of my own work, yes, absolutely. But it was a very interesting history, because in Argentina there was a trial during the 80s, then we had 10 years or 15 years of impunity, and then when the possibility to reopen the trials, the discussion about the definition of the Argentinian situation was fundamental. So my own works and the works of my team were used in some of the sentences of the courts to discuss with the international analysis, or maybe the Anglo-Saxon analysis of the genocidal social practices, just to discuss in legal terms what happened in Argentina, but why it is important, the question of definition concerning appropriation and concerning working through the trauma. Yes, because the fundamental point in which the Argentine experience was understood during the 80s was like a fight between two particular armies, and the society was in some kind alienated with this fight. So the idea of genocide, the idea that the facts affected the whole society was really important, and is really important now in the working through the trauma for the whole society and the consequences of the memory processes.
Okay, I'll take one more, and then I think we probably ought to wind up. When Marcello's telling me I was ask you a question too, but I'll probably say it.
I'm Ansel Febrero. I'm trying now to follow the process of the creation of the International Center for the Prevention of Genocide. But I would like just to go back to a very simple and popular question about memory. Partially, my family is from Argentina. Partially, my family has been suffering from the persecutions, and the use of and responsibility of memory. When we speak about the responsibility of memory, then we have to also analyze what would this memory. One of the main points that I could give you 3 different examples. The first one is about Argentina. The perpetrators were policemen and military policemen. These brought the civil society in Argentina not to trust in the police anymore. And what we see now as a reflection of that is that criminality is growing, also thanks to the fact that police is not trusted because it's unlawful. It's not just about corruption, but it's also about the process that we've been going through in Argentina in the 80s, about having to fear police to come to us in any matter. So the necessity of the responsibility of memory towards the fact that policemen were actually the implementators of mass atrocities in Argentina, but how to get on with that as the state has to get on, and police needs to rule the state or to control the state in order not to have criminality or violence. The second one was an example that really touched me about Rwanda. I was together with a Hutu professor in the Montreal Genocide Prevention International Conference 2 years ago, and there was a debate on memory about the Rwanda genocide, and at one moment he just stood up and went running away from the hall, and I just approached him, and he was crying, and I asked him why, and he responded to me, well, now I'm Hutu. My family, Hutu, was actually brutalized and killed by Hutu during the Holocaust, but I still feel guilty of being Hutu. And I still don't have recognition about the fact that the other half of my family was killed by the Tutsis on the way back. So the necessity again of how to use the memory, we have the best example overall that we had in the speech today, this morning, in the keynote speech about memory, how the use of memory can actually lead what were the victims to be perpetrators justified just because they were victims. I'm not comparing at all what now is the situation in the Middle East, but every time that we go on the analysis of what, for example, I take the example of the Gaza war, partially all the justification that goes on the Israeli side is not about the Middle East situation, the Palestinian, and again, is not Hamas, but is Palestine. In the conversation, we cannot deny the fact that there is a population there that is all Palestinians and is not Hamas population. Hamas is just a political party that might or might not reflect part of the political statements of that population. But the use in this word of the memory of, well, I'm justified because I'm persecuted all over thanks to Ahmadinejad speeches, etc., 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 justifies violence, which is not genocidal, but justifies violence in a way that memory allows me to. So this was where transfer actually.
Many questions, but I try to synthesize. The first question about Argentina is true, not only, I say, it's true that the police was involved and the question of the lack of trust in the police, but also the impact of impunity in the whole society, connected with when such crimes are not punished. But what about minor crimes? I can't be punished if the torturer is not punished. I think it's connected also with that question and with a third question, also connected with the use of some criminal organization from the perpetrators, and then how to control this organization when democracy arrives. The second question is one of the fundamental points of my idea, the question of Rwanda or the uses of memory. I think that we are wrong if we see the question as memory against oblivion. I think that's not the question. I think that there are different ways of memory, and some ways of memory are really dangerous and are really problematic ones. So the case of Rwanda is clear of my other example of the Latin American perspective, because Hutu and Tutsi are not exactly ethnic groups and has no more than 200 years or 150 years, and the violation of human rights against Hutu by Hutu were very important. So I think that the perspective that only can see the idea that one group against another group teach us nothing, and is really a problem for us, and is very hegemonic in the genocide studies until now. So that the last question is connected with that question, and I think that some of the justifications of the action, of some action of the Israeli government in the Middle East is connected with some ways in which the memory of the Shoah was constructed. I think that it's a terrible way of memory for the Jewish people. It's not a terrible way for other people, because it is a problem to understand the in my opinion, the real motives and ways of the Shoah. And it's really a problem to understand the Jewish identity today and to understand the problem in European countries with the otherness today. And in some ways, it's a way to provoke more anti-Semitism all over the world, because when you can't understand why the Shoah occurred and the rest of the people can't understand why, and the reasons are neglected, so it is easy to appear the instances of denial or the different new neo-Nazisms, because if it is ununderstandable, maybe it never happened. And I think that's why it's important, the question of the consequence of different ways of memory.
Okay, I think we better bring it to an end now. I'd like to thank all of the panel for some extremely interesting contributions, and also all of you for also asking so many thought-provoking questions. And now you can go and have something to eat, so thank you very much.